Welcome back to the Strato Automation Technical channel. In this video, I'm going to be going over some general troubleshooting techniques. If you're having trouble using our SLC program, whether it's connecting to controllers, setting stuff up, just some common things that I see people have issues with that I want you to watch out for. So first is going to be connecting to your BACnet network using the SLC software and our, whether it's our USB to micro USB cable or our USB to wire converter, kind of greenish yellow puck. So first, sometimes you want to, or all the time, you want to make sure that you're plugging it in all the way. If you're using the wire, or sorry, not the wire, the cable, the USB to micro USB cable. Sometimes people don't plug it in all the way to a working USB port on their computer, or the micro USB end isn't plugged in all the way to the service port on a controller on their network. And if you're using the USB to wire converter puck, you want to make sure that your terminals are your wires terminated properly on the correct terminals, and that you have good contact, because otherwise it's going to cause some problems. And as well, make sure the USB end is plugged in all the way to your PC. Another thing I see, so here you can see I'm connected, but if I disconnect here on the COM port option here, it'll have multiple options sometimes depending on your setup. You're going to want to make sure to choose the right one. And if you tried both of them, or all of the options that you have and none of them seem to be working, we do have a video covering how to identify the proper COM port, as well as troubleshoot that. And that video is titled USB COM port identification. That's on this channel. So go ahead and check that video out for a more in-depth of how to fix that. But that's just one area where if you're having trouble, you can go check out that video. So I'll go ahead and connect. Everything should come back. Okay. Moving on to the device config, some common things I see people have issues with. Sometimes if you're setting this up remotely, you're not at the site, and then you're going to take this project file or configuration files from the controllers and deploy them at the site at a later date. Sometimes the device instances and the address aren't set up properly. So you want to make sure that those match. Otherwise, you won't be able to push configurations or information to the controller, and it'll appear like it's offline in your tree, but it's just because it doesn't match up with the specific device that you're trying to give information to. Additionally, sometimes people accidentally change this max master and max frame. And another way to tell if something's wrong is if this baud rate is not what you're expecting, or if all the controllers on your network for whatever reason are not what they should be, you can go ahead and change those. Here I have the baud rate set to automatic on my connection, so it's just going to pick up the first one that it finds and use that. But let's say this was not what I was expecting. I would know that there's an issue with one of my controllers or multiple controllers, depending on how many controllers come in at that baud rate. Another thing I see is when you make changes, some people forget to send the device config. If you make changes, you have to press this, otherwise they won't save. A good way to verify is just after you've sent it, give it a second. So you'll send it, say yes, command has been sent successfully, and then just to verify, you can read it, it's been read successfully, and make sure nothing changes. In the app config page here, some common issues I see are people set things up and then their I/O chart, the inputs and outputs that they've configured things to, don't match up to how things were wired up in the field, and that's going to cause some issues for different stages kicking on at the right time, fans turning on and off, stuff like that's going to cause some problems. Another thing I see is sometimes after people make changes, they forget to send the application config to the controller. So anytime you make changes, it's not automatically saved. You have to send it to the controller. And a good way to verify this is after you hit send, it'll write the configuration, and then you can double check by reading from the controller and make sure nothing changes. And that's a good way to double check that everything should be golden. Another thing to watch out for, let's say I'm setting up my temperature set points here, and whether it's, configuring addresses in this address list or setting up, an external point here. So choosing a reference. Sometimes people, they choose the wrong address here if they're doing an MSTP, or they'll choose, analog value when they want analog input, stuff like that. So just double check that everything here is set up properly, because I have seen people do this incorrectly before. If you make changes down here in the PID loop, we recommend that you write down these values, or at least, have an idea of what these were before you started, in case your tuning of our current PID loops goes south. You have a backup way to get back to this. And so you can, go back to what we were using if things don't go well with your tuning. Also, I'd like to point out down here in the bottom left corner, when I'm mousing over a lot of these drop downs and, input boxes to write stuff, it'll show the corresponding value in my objects page here. So like this is, MSV3. So if I go to the object, so this is the control set point location. If I go to MSV3 in my objects tab here, room temperature set point location. So it's the same thing. So those, if you're troubleshooting, you can connect the dots between your objects tab and your application config. And finally, I guess for this, if you're having issues with the temperature reading being way off, things aren't matching up, you're getting things in the hundreds or things are really low, you want to make sure that you don't have any offsets or set points that are, calibrations that are going to be affecting your temperature readings. It's more apparent, I believe, on the backwall 437 here, but if you have something like a calibration or offset, that could be affecting your temperature. We have had some false RMAs and things like that from people just not being aware of their calibration or offset being incorrect. One thing I want to point out on this objects page here is if I double click on any of these objects, it'll bring up this window for user intervention. And on the right here, I can see what priority I'm writing at. So let's say I'm using, something other than SLC for my front end. And I want to write to a point. I can use SLC to pull up and see what each one is being, what priority everything's being written at. So I know what I need to write at in my front end. So that the program will override and actually run and not get, overwritten by the actual program in the controller itself. Additionally, on the BP848s and the BZ424 and 122 controllers, down here you see one way to tell if your T-zone, if it's acting up or you're not getting the right readings, things like that. You check your T-zone in your object list here at the bottom. -40 means, it's not communicating or there is none there. And also it should say if there is one configured in your number temperature inputs here. So it's like I have this set to 2 or 3 and go to my objects tab. And this second one here, so let's say I've put there's supposed to be 2 T-zones. And this one's reading -40, this would say fault to reflect that. But because I just have one selected in my app config, it's just going to say normal. So that's one way to tell if you're having T-zone communication issues. And finally, the last thing I want to mention here for just general SLC troubleshooting stuff is when I right click on my live view, that's how I add an extra value. So if I want to bring in other points from other controllers, I can select a different controller from this dropdown, or I can just pull in from my controller that I'm looking at. So if I double click on any of these points, I close this, see it shows up right here. And then to make this writable, I have to right click on the point, make it writable. I can rename it from here, or I can get rid of it. So that's just another thing I get some questions on, people not knowing exactly how to bring in other points and kind of customize this dashboard view here. But that's going to be all for this video. Like I said, check out some of our other videos for configurations. For that connection thing here, check out that identifying COM ports if you are having issues with that. Thanks for watching and have a great day.